Bon après-midi.
Dear colleagues, good afternoon and welcome to meeting number 16 of the Standing Committee on Foreign Affairs and International Development. I call this meeting to order. Pursuant to the motion adopted on January 31st, the committee is meeting on its study of vaccine equity and intellectual property rights.
Mr. On a point of order, or? Let me just finish my opening remarks, and if that's okay. Thank you, Mr. Morant. As always, colleagues and witnesses, interpretation is available through the globe icon at the bottom of your screen. And for members participating in person, please do keep in mind the Board of Internal Economy's guidelines for mask use and health protocols. Je profite de l'occasion pour rappeler à tout.
I would like to take this opportunity to remind all participants to this meeting that screenshots or taking photos of your screen is not permitted. Before speaking, please wait until I recognize you by name. When speaking, please speak slowly and clearly. When you are not speaking, your mic should be on mute. A reminder that all comments by members and witnesses should be addressed through the chair.
I would like to now welcome our witnesses and then turn over to you if it's a point of order just before we get started, but I would like to just make the introduction. We have with us this afternoon colleagues from CARE Canada, Dr. Ilhaz Al-Tinsi, Sexual Reproductive Health Technical Advisor. And thank you very much, Doctor, for joining us late in the day, your time. It's very much appreciated. We also have Nicole Tobin, Head of Programs, Global Health. And then from Doctors Without Borders, Dr. Adam Houston, Medical Policy and Advocacy Officer, and Dr. Jason Nickerson, Humanitarian Representative to Canada. Welcome and thank you. And from the Economist Intelligence Unit, Anna Nichols, Director, Industry Analysis. We will give the floor to each of the three groups for 5 minutes of opening remarks, beginning with CARE Canada. One more time, Mr. Morant, is it related to the discussion? Is it something else?
It's not a point of order. It was just a matter I wanted to raise. It's not a point of order, just a matter I wanted to raise.
Okay, you can wish to raise it during your allocation of time, if that's convenient?
Sure.
Okay. I understand that CARE Canada will lead us off and will be splitting their opening remarks 5 minutes between two representatives. So I will give the floor to CARE Canada. And just before we start, I have a very manual way of signaling when you have 30 seconds in your testimony or members' questioning time. So just please keep an eye on this virtually as you can. And over to CARE Canada, please, for opening remarks.
Thanks so much and good afternoon.
Monsieur le Président.
Mr. Chair, point of order.
Yeah, it's me.
Oui, Monsieur Gaudin. Yeah, oui.
En fait, je voudrais...
In fact, I just wanted to check. I haven't been able to do a sound check, so I'd like to ensure that the sound is working well and that you can hear me properly. I can hear you. Yes, I can hear you. Let us just see with the interpreters. Yes, it's good, Mr. Godin. Thank you. CARE Canada, please.
Thank you. Good afternoon. From our offices on the unceded and unsurrendered territory of the Algonquin Anishinaabe Nation, I thank the committee for inviting us to appear as part of this study. My name is Nicole Tobin, Head of Global Health Programs at CARE Canada. Gender justice is at the heart of all the humanitarian and development work we do in the CARE Confederation. Health gains have been threatened by intersecting crises of COVID, conflict, and climate. And women's leadership is essential to rebuild health systems that ensure access to life-saving services for all. CARE joins Canadian civil society in calling on Canada to work for consensus at the WTO to improve the compromise TRIPS waiver proposal that was recently tabled. Today, we are invited to testify regarding the equitable delivery of vaccine supplies focused on gender. I'm really pleased to introduce you to Dr. Ilhaz Al-Tinsi, Sexual and Reproductive Health Advisor based in Gaziantep, Turkey, with work in Syria.
Thank you very much, and also thank you for this opportunity. Addressing intellectual property rights to improve global access to supplies is essential and must be accompanied by investment in health system and health workers to deliver those supplies. CARE Confederation has reached 15.7 million people in 53 countries with our COVID programming. Though each context varies, CARE's analysis indicates that the true cost is often much higher than the global estimates account for when factoring for health workforce and community readiness costs. Vaccine equity requires targeted and increased investment in delivery. In April, CARE testified to the UN Security Council on vaccine equity gaps in humanitarian settings. Today, I will provide a testimony with Northwest Syria as a case study regarding vaccine equity and focus on awareness raising. I will give a brief description of the Syrian context. Compared to the global and Canadian populations, few Syrians have been vaccinated. Only about 9% of the Syrian total population has received one dose, and only about 5% is fully vaccinated. In Syria, COVID is at the bottom of the list of priorities. People face so many hardships, including shelling, violence, and lack of food and shelter, let alone COVID masks. They live in tents or improvised shelters and cannot social distance. However, it's positive that 70% of health and humanitarian workers in Syria are fully vaccinated by now. In our context, there's a critical shortage of all health staff. They work long hours in difficult conditions, and most health facilities are improvised. It could be a house, an abandoned building, or a school, and are not equipped as a normal hospital or a facility, health facility. The health and safety of those workers is constantly at risk. They lack consistent access to personal protection equipment, and early in the pandemic, they lacked paid sick leave. Even sometimes staff would conceal symptoms so they would not lose pay. And because of working in such context, some are threatened, beaten, or even stabbed. Yet health workers, over 70% of whom are women at the global level, are the key to equitable vaccine delivery. Trusted providers can reach underserved communities, doing door-to-door and in-person communication to build vaccine acceptance. They are trusted because they meet families' holistic health needs, including childhood immunization, reproductive and maternal health care. And it's very important to have women vaccinators who are more likely to be trusted by women patients. To achieve vaccine equity, my key recommendations are as follows. It's critically important that all actors invest in equitable health systems delivery. We ask that Canada to adequately and consistently fund frontline and community health care workers and the organizations they work for. Also to ensure that there are consistent norms and standards to ensure fair pay and safe and supportive working conditions for all health workers, including in humanitarian responses. This includes to ensure they have access to personal protection equipment, testing and treatment, vaccines, and paid sick leave. Finally, to ensure that health workers and their organizations have meaningful roles in decision-making as well as delivery for COVID vaccine rollout, their leadership and expertise must drive decision-making for healthcare delivery in crisis settings. They can address hesitancy and gender-related disparities in access to COVID information and services, including collecting and using sex, age, and gender disaggregated data. Also developing strategies to specifically reach women and other marginalized populations. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Dr. Al-Tinsy, for your opening remarks. We will now go to Doctors Without Borders for 5 minutes. I understand Dr. Nickerson will deliver remarks. Please go ahead.
Thank you very much, and thank you for having us. Doctors Without Borders, or Médecins Sans Frontières, MSF, has been on the front lines of responding to medical needs created or worsened by armed conflicts, natural disasters, and disease epidemics for more than 50 years. This experience has, of course, informed our response to the COVID pandemic. Even before vaccines became available, we urged countries and the pharmaceutical industry to remove intellectual property barriers for COVID medical technologies and to prioritize the delivery of safe and effective COVID vaccines to health workers and vulnerable people around the world. We urge this because for decades, MSF has seen how patents can create barriers between vital medicines and patients who need them for diseases like HIV and tuberculosis. We knew full well that the risk of effective vaccines becoming inaccessible to people in low and middle income countries was high. As you know, this inequity came to be, and COVID-19 continues to circulate and evolve while vaccines remain out of reach for many. We want to emphasize that inequitable global access to medicines due to intellectual property barriers is not unique to COVID-19. In fact, inequitable access to COVID vaccines is a symptom of dysfunctional pharmaceutical research and development and distribution systems. Therefore, today's conversation needs to extend beyond what needs to happen right now for this pandemic to broader questions about intellectual property and access to medicines for the future. This conversation also takes place against a backdrop of broader reforms to international law, particularly a pandemic treaty in the early stages of negotiation under the WHO. The shadow of vaccine inequity hangs over these negotiations. Canada's actions and inactions on vaccines may very well influence how it is perceived by other countries at the pandemic treaty negotiating table. To this end, the failure of the international community to come to an agreement on the narrow issue of a time-limited loosening of intellectual property rules during the pandemic, exemplified by the TRIPS waiver, first proposed in the fall of 2020 and still unresolved today, is not a promising sign, nor is Canada's refusal to adopt a public stance on this issue. A sizable majority of countries, more than 100, voiced support for the TRIPS waiver. Canada appears to have kicked the can down the road for 18 months, seemingly hoping the problem would resolve itself. While today global vaccine supply is no longer the predominant barrier to access that it was 6 months ago, intellectual property does continue to be a barrier to accessing other COVID tools like therapeutic drugs and will be a problem in future pandemics. Canada and the world needs to do considerably more to promote access to vaccine technologies, not only for COVID-19, but for other diseases, both old and new. We know there will be more pandemics. We know that there are diseases that exist today that have pandemic potential for which there are no vaccines and no effective treatments and little in the pipeline. Canada has supported good work on vaccine and therapeutics development, but the reality is that these investments often lead to technologies that are not developed beyond their early stages because of a lack of funding or commercial interest. Consider the Canadian-discovered Ebola vaccine that sat on a shelf for years. Or, if they are developed further, they end up priced out of reach of patients and health systems because Canada refuses to demand that medicines and vaccines developed with public funds be made affordable and accessible when they come to market, including for Canadians. This is bad public health, but also, frankly, bad business. A vital guiding principle should be that public investments for public health should, first and foremost, yield public benefits. They should not be subsidies for incredibly profitable companies who ultimately retain all decision-making over affordability and access. Canada's renewed support for both R&D and domestic manufacturing are welcome, but should come with strings attached. The outcome should be measured not in dollars earned, but lives saved. One area where Canada can do something positive is in relation to the Canadian-developed technology that has proven crucial to the pandemic response. The lipid nanoparticle technology underpinning mRNA vaccines, like Pfizer and Moderna, was invented in Canada by companies spun off from the University of British Columbia. Canada should be proud of this achievement, but more than that, Canada should be making sure life-saving Canadian technology gets to all who need it. Instead, Canada has been bizarrely silent on technology transfer of lipid nanoparticle technology. To encourage such transfer, Canada could be using sticks, it could be using carrots, or a combination of the two. At the moment, we're hearing crickets. We need to continue to push to ensure that people everywhere are protected against COVID-19, but we also need to be preparing for future pandemics by learning lessons of what's worked and what hasn't over the past 2.5 years. We're happy to answer your questions. Thank you.
Dr. Nickerson, thank you very much for your opening remarks. We will now go to the Economist Intelligence Unit and Ms. Nicholson. Ms. Nicholson, thank you also for being with us very late in your day, and thank you for spending time with us on this very important issue. Over to you for 5 minutes of opening remarks, please.
So, good morning. Thank you very much for inviting me as a witness for your inquiry. I'm sure you've heard plenty of evidence during these hearings about the inequity of the global vaccine rollout. I have to say that this inequity was predictable. The Economist Group forecast it back in May 2020 when the vaccines were still being developed. And a subsequent map we published which forecast that low-income countries would not see large-scale vaccination until 2023 or beyond went viral because it was so controversial. It has since been vindicated by events. I'm sorry, my lights have turned out. There were many reasons for our prediction. One was the funding and purchase deals that were being used to support the research and to secure early supplies. We realised that global supplies would be slow to ramp up, prompting vaccine hoarding. We expected bottlenecks in shipping and logistics, as well as delivery difficulties at a local level, particularly in countries with weak healthcare systems. Finally, we reckoned on vaccine hesitancy, reducing uptake in many countries to differing degrees. In reality, the vaccine rollout has been quicker than we expected in some countries. So UAE, Rwanda, Cambodia spring to mind. COVAX has been one reason for this, but so have the efforts of these countries, as well as vaccine donations by other governments and institutions, including Canada. Nevertheless, there are still 2.7 billion people across the world who are unvaccinated, and most of them live in low-income economies. Other witnesses have spoken about the health impacts of this unequal vaccine rollout, including the room it leaves for dangerous COVID mutations. The Economist Group has also highlighted the economic impact. So we predicted in September 2021 that vaccine inequity would cost the world 2.3 trillion in lost GDP, with poorer countries bearing the brunt of that. So over the 4 years from 2022 to 25, we predicted sub-Saharan Africa would lose around 2.9% of GDP as a result of low vaccination rates. Middle East and Africa would lose 1.4% of GDP, Asia Pacific 1.3%. In contrast, losses in other regions, North America, Europe, would be minimal. These forecasts point to the severe economic as well as health impacts of vaccine inequity. But the question the panel is looking at is whether intellectual property rights played a crucial role in this inequity and whether global relaxation of patent rights would help. Although companies such as Moderna have said that they will not enforce patents during the pandemic, proponents of a waiver argue it would give legal security to generic producers. However, I doubt that a waiver would have prevented the lack of global vaccine supplies that was the main source of inequity in 2021. So the right to produce innovative medicines can be protected in three ways. There are patents and IP rights. There are also, in most countries, marketing exclusivity and data exclusivity rights. What all these protections are protecting, they're not just legal barriers, they're essentially about the protection of knowledge. And this includes the technical knowledge about the formulation, but also the somewhat unwritten understanding about the production process. I would argue that this knowledge can only be acquired through technology transfer, which requires long-term buy-in and cooperation from the original developer. That cooperation would be not forthcoming if IP rights were waived against their will. And I base this opinion partly on my experience of speaking to companies in developing markets about previous efforts to waive patents under TRIPS. For example, in Brazil, in the legislation allowing compulsory licensing, which was strengthened during the pandemic. Despite this, the country's pharmaceutical companies have in recent years preferred to use voluntary licenses negotiated with the patent holder because it gives them access to that knowledge and technology transfer. So Fiocruz, for example, struck a deal with AstraZeneca that has not only allowed it to produce that vaccine, but also to develop its own. Technology transfer takes time, and so does ramping up production. That proved very difficult at first during the pandemic, partly because of global shortages of active pharmaceutical ingredients. However, more recently, these voluntary licensing deals or contracts, supported by various government institutions, have been successful in raising global output of COVID vaccines. As other witnesses have noticed, supply is no longer a barrier to the vaccine rollout. I do believe, furthermore, that the IP protections were helpful to the innovation that produced these vaccines in the first place. So some of the more publicly funded vaccines, including the Russian, Chinese, Oxford, AstraZeneca vaccines, did have less of a commercial imperative. However, the mRNA and other technologies behind the Pfizer and Moderna vaccines were largely developed in the commercial realm in the decades before COVID. So according to a report in Nature, by 2019, there were already 113 mRNA patents, of which 70% were filed by industry, notably by Moderna, CureVac, BioNTech, GSK. The reason why these companies invested in this research for decades was because these technologies have wide potential well beyond COVID. mRNA technologies can be used to combat other infectious diseases, such as HIV, as well as cancer and genetic disorders. That's why I would argue that waiving patent protection for COVID vaccines against the wishes of the patent holders would not help with vaccine inequity because it would deter the transfer of knowledge. It could also adversely affect future innovation in life-saving medicines if investors felt that patents were not secure.
Ms. Nichols, thank you very much for your opening remarks. We will now go to round one of questions by members, and these are segments that are timed at 6 minutes each. And leading us off will be Mr. Morantz for 6 minutes. Please go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'll be using my time to introduce a motion. The motion is related to Mr. Chong's Winnipeg Labs motion. As I understand it, Mr. Chong spoke with you, Mr. Chair, on Monday and asked that you set aside 1 hour on Friday, which is tomorrow, to consider the matter. You declined this reasonable request. Secondly, I emailed you yesterday asking you to set aside the last 15 minutes of this meeting to consider the matter of the Winnipeg Labs motion, and I've not yet had the courtesy of a reply. In the meantime, your government has announced a new non-parliamentary committee that has no obligation to Parliament, to report to Parliament, to be guided by Parliament, to be governed by retired justices and not elected parliamentarians.
Point of order, Mr. Chairman. Point of order, Mr. Chairman.
Point of order, and then go back to you.
Je suis désolée d'interrompre mon collègue, mais
I'm sorry to interrupt my colleague, but it seems to me that since this motion is being put forward by a member who has replaced Mr. Godin here, Mr. Godin is on the screen, and should it not be up to him to move the motion? Thank you for that point of order, Ms. Bendayan.
Madam Clerk, by the original mover or the substitute, or can it be brought by any member of the committee? Okay, the motion was submitted with notice, so it's formally before the committee, and Mr. Morantz can move it on behalf of Mr.
This
Chong.
committee that your government has announced is to be governed by retired justices, not elected parliamentarians. This, in my view, is an affront to this committee, which has been seized with the issue since December. So my motion is as follows. I move that we resume debate on Member of Parliament Michael Chong's Winnipeg Labs motion of December 13th, 2021, and that a vote on this motion be had by the end of this meeting.
Mr. Morantz, thank you. I just want to make sure that both components of that motion are in order. It's a motion to resume debate. I don't know if there's any conditions that can be attached to that. If it's dilatory and non-debatable. There's a second component, which is to land on a vote by today. Is that in order, Madam Clerk? Can we check? There's really two elements to this. So, Mr. Morantz, for the guidance that I have is the second component, which is to land the motion today in the form of a vote, makes it a debatable vote motion. Whereas if you were to resume, just to move to resume debate right now, that would be non-debatable, trigger a vote by members of the committee. Is it the second option that you wish to exercise to actually?
Yes.
Okay, thank you very much.
Sorry, no, I want it to be debated now.
Yes, so with that condition added that it be voted on today, it becomes debatable because it's something in excess of just resuming debate. So thank you very much for that. The motion is.
Excuse me, again, the speaking list.
Yes, so the motion is before the committee. I would invite colleagues to raise their hands for interventions, both virtual and in person. We're trying to develop an integrated speakers list. Mr. Genuis has his hand raised. Any other interventions, please signal so. Mr. Morantz. Any colleagues online? Not at the moment. Why don't we start with Mr. Genuis, please, and then Mr. Morantz.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. And it's important to just underline the context for this motion as well. It's a bit frustrating because as Conservatives, we've wanted to protect the rights of Parliament to access documents, and B, also have a good constructive working relationship with this committee. We don't relish the need to bring forward a motion like this in the context where we have witnesses. But the reality is that this motion was first moved in December. The government dragged it out at the time, and we've been working and looking for opportunities, as my colleague has highlighted, to be able to bring this motion back forward. And we've continually been stymied and blocked in the ability to actually have that debate here at this committee on the issue of the Winnipeg lab documents. Now, as the Foreign Affairs Committee, I think we have to take very seriously the fact that we're talking about issues of threats to democracy, about democratic decline around the world. And part of how we should respond to that is ensure that we are always consistent with democratic best practices and the rule of law and the rights of Parliament in terms of our own functioning and our own practice here in Canada. We had a situation previously where a committee of this House, exercising all of its rights as a committee, ordered the production of documents. The government repeatedly refused to comply. And in the context of that, all opposition parties, Conservative, Bloc, and NDP, were very firm about the point of the rights of parliamentary committees. And further, in fact, the initial requests for documents were unanimously agreed to by all members of the committee, including by members of the government. So this is an important principle about access to documents, and we've tried to bring this issue back to the committee to have the debate on it at this committee. And unfortunately, you, Mr. Chair, have not responded to my colleague, the Vice Chair, have not seen fit to set aside time to actually schedule this discussion. And so I think we need to talk about this. And it's not just about, can the government create an opportunity for external actors, judges, to rule on what parliamentary committees can't and can't see. Parliamentarians shouldn't presume to tell judges how to do their job, and judges shouldn't presume to replace the functioning of parliamentary committees. So I think this is a clear issue. We're saying let's bring back this motion. Let's have a debate. Let's bring it to a conclusion and a vote. And I think if we aren't able to proceed with that, then we will have really, I think, undermined the proper functioning of what committees are supposed to be doing. Again, I just come back as a Foreign Affairs Committee. We have to think about democratic norms. We have to think about the example we're setting. We don't want to see democratic decline here in Canada, as we've seen in some other countries. And that means defending and respecting the prerogatives of Parliament to order documents and not backing off or claiming that we're victims of some logjam. There's no logjam here. It's a matter of the government having just refused to adhere to their constitutional obligations. So I hope this motion from my colleague passes, and I hope we'll be able to move forward with this motion. Thank you very much.
Mr. Genuis, thank you very much. Mr. Moretz, please, over to you.
Thank you, Mr. Well, just to continue on with what my colleague has said, we have long-established democratic institutions in this country, one of which is the system of standing committees, of which we are participating in right now. In this particular case, Mr. Chong introduced a motion that was passed by the House of Commons in the last Parliament that is a very thoughtful motion and deals very, I think, in a very reasonable manner with the idea of making sure that there are redactions, that the documents be reviewed by the law clerk and parliamentary counsel and by this committee, which reports directly to Parliament. The ad hoc committee that your government has proposed is not responsible to Parliament, and it really begs the question whether or not something very, very serious happened, whether there was a serious national security breach at the Winnipeg lab. So I think it's vital at this point that this committee, which has been seized with this motion since December, debate this issue, get these documents, discuss what needs to be redacted or doesn't need to be redacted, and that this idea of a ad hoc committee actually be dispensed with. You know, as parliamentarians, we don't tell judges how they should decide their cases. And frankly, Mr. Chair, 3 retired justices shouldn't be telling us as elected parliamentarians participating in this committee as a democratic institution how we should be deciding this matter. And so I urge you, and I think to ensure the confidence of all Canadians in the integrity of our democratic institutions, that an issue as important as this, where we've had call for production of documents over and over again in this Parliament and in the last Parliament, that we need to make sure that this matter is handled in accordance with long-established historical systems that have been established specifically for this purpose. This motion is rightfully before the committee, and I
Mr.
urge
Martins, if I
all
can
of our
interrupt
colleagues
you-
to support the motion. Thank
If
you.
I can interrupt you might be well at the end of this intervention, but we have bells. Colleagues, can I have unanimous consent to, I'm going to propose, I don't know if colleagues wish to vote in person, I'm going to propose 15 minutes of extended time into the bells as a starting point. If anybody has contravening views to go more into the period, we can do that. But is 15 minutes okay? Okay, so unanimous consent to continue for 15 minutes? Yes? Okay. Back to you, Mr. Martins. I think you were just about to wrap up.
Well,
or-
I think I've made my arguments. I think it's vitally important that this issue be considered by a standing committee, the Foreign Affairs Committee, not by some makeshift ad hoc committee that's outside of Parliament that does not report to Parliament. It makes no sense, Mr. Chair, and I urge all members of this committee to respect the integrity of the standing committees and of our democratic institutions and make sure that this ad hoc committee goes nowhere and that this is considered right here where it should be. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Martins. I have on the speakers list right now Mr. Sarai, Madame Bandayan, and Mr. Genuis. Mr. Sarai, over to you, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I think it must be noted that the new committee that is being struck to look at the specific issue at hand in regards to these very sensitive and secure nature of it is an ad hoc committee of parliamentarians. This has been done before. We've had it done at the request of the opposition for all parliamentarians to do that for the Afghanistan, other issues. The only particular difference in this case is that 3 retired judges will only chosen by every party in this respect. So it'll be a consensus-based appeal to get those judges. We'll look at the redactions that are required in order for the security and sensitive nature of this report, and those are where the judges come into play, so that partisanship doesn't come into play, and acknowledge our agreements with Global Five Eyes and other agencies to protect the nature of our intelligence. And I think those independent views are very important to have. And I think it's an essential part in how we govern. And I think as parliamentarians, we have our obligations, which would be accommodated in such a committee. And we also have obligations from other commitments that we have. And for that, to enforce that, people trust the nature of our justices and the integrity that they have, and therefore having 3 judges that have retired have an immense amount of experience in that to be responsible to ensure that what gets out in a public format is secure, protects the integrity of our security systems, as well as the intelligence reports we receive from others. I think that's a very appropriate measure.
Mr. Sarai, thank you very much. Just before we go to Madame Bandayan, colleagues, we have a panel of witnesses, 2 of whom are dialing in from overseas. We have a number of colleagues on the speakers list, and we're close to what would be our extended time with this panel. I'm wondering if we could have consensus to release the panel with our thanks. I'm grateful that they were able to give us their opening remarks. They're very free to send us additional comments or points in writing or to respond to questions from members in writing. But would colleagues agree that we thank them and let them?
Mr. Chair, with respect, I believe I was up next on the speakers list, and actually that was going to be what I would have requested. But before releasing the witnesses, I would like to put on the record that we have before us Médecins Sans Frontières, Care Canada, and I believe Ms. Nichols, another witness, all of whom, from the work that I have read and the briefings that I was looking at to prepare for this meeting, are working tirelessly in order to save lives, in order to support people who are vulnerable right across the world. I think it is an aberration that we are releasing them without asking them their questions that they have prepared for and that they have come to this committee to discuss. I think it is extremely unfortunate that the Conservatives are playing
You should have given us
politics.
time in 4 months.
I think it is extremely unfortunate that the
Genuis.
Conservatives are playing politics when we have before us a panel of witnesses that have come.
Order,
The
please,
floor is
Mr.
not
Genuis.
yours, sir.
Let's try to keep order, please, colleagues.
And I would like to thank these witnesses for taking the time to be here today. Mr. Chair, I would request that we very respectfully excuse them from the rest of this meeting.
Everybody agreed that we should, with our sincere thanks, ask our panel to disconnect at their discretion. And thank you for being with us. And we will hear from you in writing if you choose to add arguments to your submissions today. Merci beaucoup pour votre témoignage et votre expertise et votre service.
Thank you very much for your testimonies today.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Mr. Genuis, back to you, please.
Mr. Chair, let's be very clear about the situation here. We moved a motion about the basic democratic rights of parliamentarians to access documents. We moved that motion 4 months ago. Now, that was following a situation where the government took the Speaker of the House in the previous Parliament to court to prevent him from enforcing the rights of parliamentarians, and then after that called an election to block further action by Parliament on this issue of the violation of privileges of parliamentarians. Now, it is a great and ancient right of parliamentarians to request any documents to use them in the exercise of their functions. This government showed flagrant disregard for this core constitutional principle and then called an election after trying to take the Speaker of the House to court. We came back in December with a motion to order these documents to resume the work that had been done in a previous Parliament. And then after that, you, Mr. Chair, and other members of the committee did not give us an opportunity to have conversation on that motion for 4 months. So to suggest that we are somehow responsible for the fact that in the presence of these witnesses, it was finally necessary to bring this forward is beyond outrageous. Now, if the chair had so much as offered my colleague, the vice chair, the courtesy of a response to an email asking for 15 minutes to discuss this, we could have, I think, scheduled this well. Now, there's a time slot that would have been available tomorrow for an hour when we could have taken this time to debate this as well. From what I understand, that time slot is still available. We could have spent an hour tomorrow debating this issue. And instead, the request from our shadow minister, Mr. Chong, for an hour to debate the issue of the Winnipeg Labs document was completely ignored. So when the government shows such disrespect for the basic rights of parliaments, the ability to access documents, at a certain point, we have to assert the importance of democratic norms. Because I have news for this committee. There are international organizations that monitor and track the state of democracy, and they are identifying issues of democratic decline happening in Canada. And I'll give you an example of that. In terms of the score given by IDEA, which is a Swedish think tank that evaluates democracy, Canada's score for checks on government has fallen substantially from 0.77 to 0.68. We are behind peer countries in terms of effectiveness of parliament scores and in terms of checks on government. So when we talk about questions of democratic decline and we see what is happening here in Canada with our own institutions, these are issues that we have to take seriously. So I have a great deal of respect for the important work being done by witnesses. But if, again, the government is showing such disregard for our institutions and for the right of members of parliament to request documents, then it is time for us to take action. I know that the Parliamentary Secretary for Foreign Affairs, who was a member of the Special Committee on Canada-China Relations in the last Parliament, was very clear as well at the time, initially, about saying we should be able to access these documents. And he, along with members of that committee, voted twice unanimously to request those documents, documents which subsequently his government refused to hand over in violation of the privileges of the committee and of this House. And so we've been on this saga for a long time. And it's not a complicated saga. It's not a question of a log jab or procedural complexity. This is an issue of the government failing to follow the law, failing to recognize the fundamental legal prerogatives of Parliament. Now, these are ancient prerogatives, and they exist in Parliament throughout the world. Mr. Sarai talks about our obligations to other Five Eyes countries. Other Five Eyes countries have governments that respect the rights of their parliaments. I can tell you that the United Kingdom is not going to have a problem sharing intelligence with Canada, even if Canada respects the right of parliamentarians, because the UK shares intelligence with parliamentary committees and respects the right of parliamentary committees to make these requests. Now, the government's fudge here is to try to confuse us about the very obvious difference between the idea of a parliamentary committee and the idea of a committee of parliamentarians. Now, this is an obvious distinction. To make it amply clear, a committee of parliamentarians could be any group of parliamentarians to get together and do anything. If myself and Mr. Abeltief and Mr. Morantz have a Scotch drinking committee that meets once a month in Winnipeg, that would be a committee of parliamentarians, because it would be a committee of people who happen to also be parliamentarians. That would be very different from a parliamentary committee. A parliamentary committee which is constituted by the House, that has rights given to it by the House, that is part of the democratic functioning of our country. So when the government says we're going to go off over here and create a committee of parliamentarians that we control, that is subject to a different set of rules, that is so fundamentally different from a parliamentary committee. Mr. Sarai said, well, we've done this in other cases. We've created special committees. Yes, we've created special parliamentary committees. The Afghanistan committee that he referred to is a parliamentary committee. The Special Committee on Canada-China Relations, and there have been other committees on pay equity and other issues in the times that I've been a parliamentarian, those are special committees of Parliament. They are parliamentary committees, and crucially, they have the rights of parliamentary committees, which include the right to request unredacted documents and to review those documents. Now, that is different from the government saying, okay, we're going to create a committee over here of MPs and we're going to create new specific rules that apply to it. So this fudge that the government is trying to insert in what is actually a very clear and simple issue. Here's the simple issue, that a parliamentary committee is not just a committee of parliamentarians. It's not just a group of MPs that are getting together. A parliamentary committee has a special legal and constitutional role in this country. And that is, it exercises democratic functions, it reviews legislation, it plays a key role in the legislative process. It's not just here to hear witnesses and make policy recommendations, but it can order specific things. It can order documents. It can review sensitive information. And it can give specific direction that in certain contexts has to be abided by. And unfortunately, one of the challenges is it has limited remedies. So when the government has in the past ignored the legal obligations that it has to respond to a committee, the committee's remedy is to refer that matter to the House, and the House can take further action. But the question before us simply is the government required to follow the law, or does the government think of itself as above the law? And do members here want to insist on the principle that the committees have these rights, or they don't? And I will note that members of all opposition parties, including members of the NDP, have been in the past very clear and consistent about asserting the existence of these rights. I recall in the last Parliament, there was a motion at this committee dealing with access to information about arms exports. And it was put forward by former MP Jack Harris, and it was supported by at least all members of the opposition. I think members of the government may have even supported it. Members of the NDP have at times very much, I think, in fact, consistently up until this point, insisted on that very same principle. And I think members should keep an eye on what is being lost if we start to allow the erosion of this principle. And I talked earlier about the question of declining democracy. And this isn't something that we're just coming up with. You know, credible international think tanks that track and measure the state of democracy look at different variables and indicators. And we do see, in terms of what is happening in the democratic life of this country, a lack of respect for democratic norms, a lack of respect for the law from the government. And I could bring up all kinds of other examples that are in the news right now, and I won't, but I think members are aware of them. And the fact that these things are contributing to the fundamental problems and challenges that we have here. So the question for members is, do we think that a chair who's a member of the government should be able to simply ignore for months and months the right and wish of members of Parliament to discuss an issue, and in particular to bring forward a question of the right to access documents? Or is this something that people are willing to, for a cheap deal, shrug off and say, well, we're going to replace a committee of Parliament, a parliamentary committee, with a group of parliamentarians getting together under a rubric defined, established, and controlled by the government? So we shouldn't just think about this as a short term, this is the party thing this way or that way. This is a fundamental principle of how our democracy works and the standards that we want it to work under. So, Mr. Speaker, I hope we will support this motion. We will be able to move forward and finally do something that we should have done 4 months ago, that we probably should have done 6 months before that. That is, insist that on a key issue of the Winnipeg Lab documents and all the issues and questions that Canadians have around that, that we allow parliamentarians to access those documents in the context of a parliamentary committee that has real power given to us not by government, but by the people that elected us and by the constitutional framework that is so fundamental to this nation. I hope that members of parliament will look past any short-term considerations and seek to defend this principle. Because if the NDP or any other party allow the erosion of that principle, it will have long-lasting consequences. Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'm done.
We're at the point that we had agreed to extend the debate to. Just before we probe UC to continue further, I wanted to probe with members. We have a second panel who is supposedly to start with us now, but we also have a speakers list that now contains 4 people. Is there consensus to release the second panel? Is there will to continue this discussion to the point where we would tell our second panel that unfortunately we cannot hear them today?
No, Mr. Speaker, I would like the second panel.
Okay. Can we have views from other members? I mean, it becomes a bit of a chicken and egg question because we haven't adjourned this debate. There's a speakers list. It is going to continue just in the interest of practicality and the vote that's intervening. I think this panel is not going to happen with every bit of interest, but I just wanted to hear views if you would agree that we would release under these circumstances.
Mr. Chair, I think it's sensible under the circumstances to release the second panel, but you know, if in any event, if members want them to wait around and see what happens, that's okay too. But I think it makes more sense to release them under the circumstances.
Madam McPherson?
You know, as devastating as it is for me to say this, I think that it is very, very clear what we were hoping to avoid. We will not be able to avoid. The opposition the Conservatives have decided that this is more important than getting to the bottom of vaccine equity. It is so disappointed. And
I don't want to continue debate because we're at the point that we've agreed to stop
I think that
debate.
it is only fair to release the witnesses, and hopefully we can have them come back at another time.
Colleagues, any opposition to that? Just in light of the circumstances at the moment, that we thank our second panel and bid them farewell for the time being. We don't really have much of an option unless everybody wishes to withdraw from the speakers list and we change tack. I don't see the will of the committee as being that at the moment. So with that, I think we will thank, Madam Clerk, our second panel. We are at the point that we've agreed to stop for the vote. Is there consent to continue further for another, I don't know, we need UC for another 5 minutes? Yes, no? Okay, I see shaking of heads. So that stops the discussion until we've got the result from the vote, and we stand suspended until that time. We will resume our discussion. I have currently a speakers list that has Mr. Oliphant, Mr. Isasi, and Mr. Bergeron. Mr. Oliphant, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and my remarks will be brief. I will assert very profoundly that, as Mr. Jennis said, I believe, and not quite quoting him, but I believe in the supremacy of Parliament. I believe in the absolute right of parliamentarians to request documents, papers, and others to do their work. But I also am very much convinced that in this situation, an elegant solution has been reached, and I am hoping that the Conservative Party and the Bloc Québécois will avail themselves to the opportunity to both read unredacted documents and to understand the nature of the redactions, and then to deal with the process that will involve an independent judicial panel that will make final determination. I think that it respects both Parliament, and there is nothing in our tradition that says parliamentary committees are paramount over parliamentarians, and that there is flexibility. And there's always movement and understanding within the tradition. I heard Mr. Jennis earlier speak about a shadow minister, and I would ask him, through you, Mr. Chair, at some point to tell me where in our standing orders that title exists. But we accept it. Because it is a moving tradition that one party has chosen to use. But it's not part of parliamentary tradition, and it is not part of our standing orders. However, we suffer it, and we allow them to use that. But it isn't part of our tradition, just as parliamentary committees are part of our tradition, but there's nothing in our tradition that doesn't allow for other things. We are borrowing a page, frankly, from former Prime Minister Stephen Harper, who I think, again, also found an elegant solution when it came to the Afghanistan papers. And that was acceptable to the Conservatives in that day in a very similar situation. And I think I am hoping that they will see that this is a very acceptable solution and elegant. It does two things. It preserves the right of parliamentarians who are delegated, and I am not at everything that happens in Parliament, but as long as there are parliamentarians sharing my views involved in it, I feel part of it. So this gives a chance for Parliament to express its supremacy and to make that demand. It at the same time also honors the nature of public safety and public security that I think, I would hope that the party of civil rights, which the Conservative Party has declared it to be since the Declaration of Human Rights was made under a Conservative government, I hope that they would see that also we have a responsibility as parliamentarians to uphold the good for the whole country. And that extends us beyond partisan politics. It extends us into doing something that's good. So we will be, on our side, we'll be voting against this motion. Not in a vacuum, however. We're voting against it knowing that there's a solution that's been proposed, and we'll be voting against it knowing that, with hope, that the official opposition will find a way to involve themselves. They've asked to see the papers. Papers are going to be available, and this is a way for them to see it. And I hope that they would trust their colleagues who are chosen to be part of that committee to do that work on their behalf. So thank you, Mr. Chair.
Mr. Oliphant, thank you very much. Mr. Isasi, please, go ahead.
Thank you kindly, Mr. Chair. I have to say, after having listened to Mr. Oliphant, I think he's covered all the points, and I have no further comments.
Mr. Isasi, I'm advised that there was an issue with your sound. Could you, just to get on the record, could you unplug and replug and just say what you said again, briefly, please? We want to make sure that you are recorded. It was just
yes. Can you hear me now, Mr. Speaker?
1 second. Say a bit more.
1, 2, 3. Can you hear me?
No. No, I'm being told no. If you'd like, if it's a persistent issue, we can give the floor to Monsieur Bergeron, and you can come back in after just to make sure that we capture your comments.
No, I have no further comments to make.
Okay. Thanks very much. Monsieur Bergeron, s'il vous plaît.
Mr. Bergeron, you have the floor. Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'll try to be brief. I'll vote in favor of this motion. I have every reason to be sympathetic to it. First, because I was one of the MPs that called for these documents, and also because the Bloc Québécois was also excluded from the planning between the NDP and the Liberal Party for the creation of this ad hoc committee that doesn't fall under parliamentary rules. That being said, I find it disgraceful the way our colleagues went about this today to bring forward this motion. First, because we weren't informed of it. We didn't know what was going to happen today. When you talk about collaboration among parliamentarians, it would have been good to give us an overview of what was coming. I understand that there's something topical that would mean that we want to proceed quickly, but I found it a little over the top the way Mr. Jennis was speaking, the way he was rendering his garments, saying it was unacceptable that this motion that was before us since December hadn't been adopted. Well, we had the opportunity to define a work plan, and to my great surprise, the Conservatives didn't come back with the motion on the Winnipeg Lab. I asked my colleagues, is there a mistake? Is there a reason why you haven't brought this motion on the Winnipeg Lab back up? They said there were internal considerations that meant it wasn't the time to bring back the Winnipeg Lab motion. So it's today without, well, aside from the secret negotiations between the NDP and the Liberals, there's nothing that meant it had absolutely to be today. And that we had to cavalierly release witnesses who prepared themselves to speak to us, provide their perspective, their insights on the important matter of vaccine equity. I am extremely embarrassed even though I support what is brought forward by our Conservative colleagues today, I'm extremely embarrassed by the way they did so. The very cavalier, impolite way we've behaved consequently with our witnesses. Earlier, we brought up the possibility of asking them to come back at a later date. Well, honestly, if I was one of those witnesses, I would say thanks, but no thanks. I prepared myself, I was ready, I took time. Some of our witnesses were abroad. I know what they're going through because this morning I was online for the European Council Parliamentary Association. So I'm in the same time zone as our European friends. And I find it unacceptable that we behaved in such a fashion. If we want to correctly represent our fellow citizens, we need to show a basic level of consideration to people when we invite them, when they prepare their insights for us on a very important matter. So that is what I wanted to say. Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you very much, Mr. Bergeron. On the list, I have Ms. McPherson and Mr. Jennings.
I'm just wondering if we can keep in mind that we had a preference for finishing as close to 5:30 as possible. Madam McPherson, please, and then Mr. Jennings.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And I just want to echo some of the things that have been said by my colleague, Mr. Bergeron. What I was very much hoping to avoid in this committee was the filibustering, the shenanigans, the back and forth that prevented this committee from getting work done in the last Parliament. That was my goal. That was what I was hoping for. And certainly knowing the time we are in, where vaccine equity is a issue that is affecting billions of people around the world. The fact that we are in the midst of a war and need to make sure that we have the time to be examining what Russia is doing in Ukraine, the fact that there are conflicts in Tigray, the fact that we have to have opportunities so that we can actually look at what's happening with Palestine and Israel, with Afghanistan. I am so dismayed that the Conservatives chose to put their petty politics in front of all of those issues, all of those very important issues. And I do have to say as well that the idea that they have done everything they can to work with members of this committee is completely false. You know, we were asked with 3 days notice to be here on a Friday afternoon. I made it very clear to members of the Conservative Party that that would not be possible. That first of all, I had house duty. I am a House officer. I can't give up that duty. I have an obligation to represent my constituents in the House of Commons. And then, you know, I need to get back home to my constituency. That's what members of Parliament do on the weekend, so that I can be in my constituency, that I can be meeting with constituents. I make plans. I make you know, all kinds of things are on my calendar so that I can reach out to my constituents on the weekend before flying back to Ottawa to be here next week to get to work. So 3 days notice, I'm sorry, that's not appropriate. To say you worked 4 months to get the committee to work together and then gave us 3 days notice on an emergency meeting is completely inappropriate. You know, we have a solution here that would give parliamentarians the ability to see those documents. We need to find a way to work like adults in the room so that we don't end up in a situation where we are filibustering this committee. Our work is too important. I'm deeply disappointed in the fact that we weren't able to bring our witnesses forward today, and I'll be bringing forward a motion to ask for us to have that returned. And I certainly hope Mr. Bergeron's prediction that they will find that not worth their time to be incorrect. I certainly hope they will agree to join us again. It was an important panel. It was going to give us important information, and I would certainly hope that we can have them back. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Ms. McPherson, thank you very much. Mr. Jennings, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'll be brief and very respectfully. If a particular member wants this committee to work well and in a collegial fashion, that member should not engage in secret negotiations with the government with respect to the process of these documents allegedly being handed over, which do not include all of the parties on this committee. I agree that the work of this committee on many fronts is critically important. The rights of this committee to access documents are also critically important. The rights of parliamentary committees and the conventions that are core about the rights of parliamentarians in our Constitution, those are also critically important. And we could have taken time tomorrow. We could have set aside time today. And the reason this was necessary is, in particular this week, the matter of urgency was the revelation of the secret negotiations which required this committee to pronounce on this issue. And finally, comparisons were made to the situation of the Afghan detainee documents. Let's remember that in the case of the Afghan detainee documents, Speaker Milliken made a ruling that ruling said that the Parliament had the right to access those documents, but that he would allow time for dialogue between all parties. That dialogue occurred, and it was done fully in accordance with the ruling of Speaker Milliken. Speaker Milliken, who ironically was elected originally as a member of the Liberal caucus. When Speaker Rota, who was unlike Speaker Milliken, elected by the party of the government at the time, made a ruling. The government did not follow his ruling and, in fact, subsequently took him to court. The way that the government of Stephen Harper acted towards Speaker Milliken and the way that this government acted towards Speaker Rota could not be more different. In one case, abiding by the ruling. In the other case, taking the Speaker to court. Mr. Speaker, I think the arguments are there, and I'm prepared to proceed to a vote. But let me just say that of all the issues that we deal with as a committee, everything is ultimately downstream from our recognition of the rights of parliamentary committees, the ability of them to compel documents, to compel evidence, and the substantive role of those committees to act from those particular rights. That is our prime directive as a committee is the ability to use those rights to access documents and information and to inform government through that access in ways that other people studying the same issues don't have the powers to do. So we cannot cede that, and we cannot accept a solution that takes as its premise that the government doesn't have to comply with the orders of parliamentary committees. And on that point, we firmly stand.
Mr. Genuis, thank you very much. Colleagues, are there any additional interventions on the motion that's before the committee from colleagues in the room or virtual? I'm going to take another look just to make sure. Nobody in the room, nobody online. Thank you. Then procedurally, there are two votes in front of us. The first vote would be to agree to resume debate and to agree to vote today. That was the motion that was brought by Mr. Morantz. And then once the original motion from Mr. Chong is before us, we need to vote on that motion. If the first motion passes. Is there any opposition to the first motion that Mr. Morantz brought, which was to resume debate and to vote on the motion today?
Let's have a recorded vote, yeah.
Okay. There's been a request for a recorded vote. Madam Clerk, if you could take us through that, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. The vote is on the motion of Mr. Morantz. Ms. Bendayan.
Oui.
Yes. Mr. Assassi.
Yes.
Dr. Fry.
Yes.
Mr. Oliphant. Yes. Mr. Zuberi.
Yes.
Mr. Genuis.
Yes.
Monsieur Godin.
Yes.
Mr. Abou-Taif.
Yes.
Mr. Morantz.
Yes.
Monsieur Bergeron.
Oui.
Ms. McPherson.
Yes.
Mr. Chair, that is 11 yeas.
Okay, Madam Clerk, thank you very much. That motion carries unanimously. In theory, hopefully not in practice, there is now the motion in front of the committee, which is again open for debate. Is there any further debate on Mr. Chong's motion as moved today that's before the committee? Seeing none, is there a request for a recorded vote on this one as well? Okay, Madam Clerk, on the actual motion, if you could take us through a recorded vote.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. The vote is on the motion of Mr. Chong, originally moved on December 13th. Ms. Bendayan. No. Mr. Asasi?
No.
Dr. Fry?
No.
Mr. Oliphant?
No.
Mr. Zuberi?
No.
Mr. Abul Taif?
Yes.
Mr. Genuis?
Yes.
Monsieur Godin?
Oui.
Mr. Morantz?
Yes.
Monsieur Bergeron?
Oui.
Ms. McPherson?
No.
Mr. Chair, that is 5 yeas and 6 nays.
Madam Clerk, thank you very much, and that disposes of the motion. Colleagues, just before we close, I just wanted to flag with you. One second, Mr. Oliphant. I'll just want to make a very quick point. It's been circulated to you a set of 2 proposals for travel. I would suggest if colleagues can review that over the weekend, those 2 proposals, and we come to a quick agreement and motion and support on Monday before or after our panels, that would be much appreciated. Mr. Oliphant.
Ms. McPherson said that she was going to have a motion after this. I just want to make sure that on the screen she has a chance. I didn't know whether she had her hand up or not, or still wants to make the motion, which I think could be unanimous, I hope.
I would certainly do that if it could make that unanimous. I would certainly love to bring that motion forward, Mr. Chair.
If we can draw a quick consensus, a UC motion, yes. If there's protracted debate, we're going to run into other issues.
Mr. Chair, maybe we can find out what the motion is before we agree to allow it to be moved by unanimous consent.
So we will. Okay, that's a very roundabout way of doing it. But yes, could you give us the gist of the motion before moving it, Ms. McPherson?
Yes, the motion would be that we bring back the panelists or invite the panelists from today that we were unable to hear from and unable to question back to committee so that we have another opportunity to ask them questions and to hear the testimony from the second panel.
Okay, Mr. Genuis, would you agree?
Agreed, yeah, we would agree.
Mr. Genuis has agreed to consider that motion. The motion is therefore before the committee. Any opposition to that motion? Seeing none, the motion carries. Thank you, Ms. McPherson. And with that, we stand adjourned until our next meeting. Merci beaucoup.